elle est en place. C'est la poudre.
Tiens, on a découpé une femme en morceaux rue de la bienséance à 2 pas du chat. Tiens, on a découpé une...
I am a feminist.
Je vous obsède avec une constance.
Je ne me suis pas conduit
qui appelle quand même l'admiration.
D'une façon conforme à ce qu'on attend d'une jeune fille d'abord et d'une femme ensuite.
I'm sorry that I didn't become the world's first black classic pianist.
Donald Trump.
Je crois qu'une femme qui existe dans son temps, à l'intérieur de son temps, n'a pas d'époque, elle marque son époque.
Welcome to La Poudre, an intimate, in-depth conversation with inspiring women. They are artists or activists. They are creative. They're powerful. How did they become women? What books did they read? What fights did they fight? What do they scream? What do they dream? I am Lauren Bastide, and today my guest is Chris.
I'm a concept in the sense that I spend a lot of time explaining and then winning over. Before it could become beautiful and friendly, I feel like my artistic career has been punctuated by moments where I just have to wait for people to understand.
I want to buck. I want to come. I want to get wet. I want to scream. I want to be naked. I want to have a boner. I want to ejaculate. I want to bite. I want to show my breasts on Instagram. I do not want to hide my dildo. I want to talk about clitoris over the dinner table. I want to desire, not wait to be desired first. I want you. So what?
Qu'est-ce qu'une femme doit faire ici? Para foliarse, para foliarse. Qu'est-ce qu'une femme doit faire ici? Para joderse, para joderse. Est-ce qu'il faut payer?
With Chris, we talked about performance, control, and sex.
Est-ce qu'il faut donner? J'ai déjà donné, donné. J'ai quitté.
J'ai donc face à moi. I am now in front of the artist Chris, once called Christine and the Queens, the composer, songwriter, musician and producer of a fabulous eponymous album that has relentlessly accompanied me for the last few months. You've sold more than 1 million records worldwide, been awarded countless awards. Madonna is basically a fan of yours. Thank you, Chris, for being here.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Your work summons a concept that is very dear to me and to feminism. That concept is queer. Queer is about being strange and proud to be. It's claiming the right to multiple selves, the rejection of the binary, the idea you can perform your gender as well as your identity. Everything from your music videos to your songs, your costumes, your amazing stage performances scream queer. It's not a very easy thing to say, and it's even more difficult thing to do. In 2014 you said, I'm worse than double. Does it still mean something to you?
Yeah, I still relate to it. I was about to say that it brings structure to my life, but I could say that it deconstructs it just as well. Questioning who we are, our way to connect to each other, and the deconstruction of society's rather patriarchal standards is more likely to mark the beginning of a reflection rather than its ending. It's an evolving transformation. And I admit this questioning brings me great pleasure. I even find some erotical in it, reinventing this exploration. So yeah, worse than double. Damn, I'd forgotten I ever said that, but I agree with myself. Which is good enough, I guess.
This sentence is very powerful, very true, very political, actually.
Yeah, I agree. I'm gonna write it down and self-quote myself. This could escalate quickly. I'm quoting myself past while perfectly agreeing with my inner self.
That's very important. So Chris is a character you've created, a phallic woman with bound breasts.
Yeah.
Christine was the character that gave you the audacity to perform on stage. I noticed you talk about Chris and Christine using the third person.
Yes.
In La Poudre, I usually summon the I. So would you be okay with me talking to you as Héloïse, your real name?
Sounds good to me, since I will most probably be inhabited by Chris and Christine equally, so
Worse than double.
Worse than double, that's it. Never really sure. The new album. Okay, I'm good with it.
So you grew up in Nantes. What was it like to grow up in Nantes?
Okay, let's be super precise. I grew up in Saint-Sébastien-sur-Loire, in Nantes' residential suburb. I say this because living in the suburbs changes your perception. You say stuff like, let's go to the city center.
Downtown.
In fact, I still say it, even in Paris. People find it charming. Shall we go to the city center? Well, Parisians will be like, which center? We're already in the center already. Well, it was nice, a very pleasant city to grow up in. It was culturally dynamic, allowing me to attend amazing plays and dance performances. I praise my family a lot because I feel very lucky to have been able to grow up in a house filled with great books and great films. My parents adore theater and literature, which is a true blessing. Being around great literature is the best. I read great novels at a very young age. I quickly developed very romantic mechanisms. At 10, I would write love letters talking about Rochester, pretending I was Jane Eyre. Not very helpful for my actual love life, but...
Yeah, aiming for Jane Eyre at 10 isn't a piece of cake, right?
Yeah, it was too soon. Too soon. I could have, though, resonated for someone, but it didn't. I can't remember ever being bored. I willingly left my home at 18 to study in Paris because I couldn't wait to be independent, but I never suffered from growing up in Nantes. It was a charming city. I speak of it as if it were a small village, but it's not. Nantes is a big city.
Were both of your parents professors?
Yeah, both professors. My father taught English literature at the Northern Faculty.
He was specialized in gender studies, and my brain exploded when I read this.
Yeah, he's not literally specialized in gender studies, but he addresses them. His specialty is Victorian literature, an era allowing him to analyze gender issues just as well. Sometimes it leads him to very specific and queer literature. That's why I forgot the writer's name, he lent me Sarah Waters' novels when I was really, really young.
Attendez, c'est là que la romancière m'échappe. Je crois qu'il m'avait filé des romans de Sarah Waters really, really young.
You just switched to English, but it's nothing. You're just back from touring in Australia.
The Turner syndrome strikes again. Yeah, I was very young. Sarah Waters writes novels set in the Victorian era, but her work is absolutely queer and erotical and lesbian. So it was fantastic. I was only 15 when the book fell into my lap, which initiated me to a lot of things at a very young age. I feel like my parents consciously they didn't force me to read, but we didn't have to read at all costs. But I was already...
You were handled these tools at a very young age, anyway.
Yeah, very keen, yeah. And I also remember walking across our very well-stocked library and thinking to myself, what am I going to read next? Titles sparked my interest and I picked up the book. It just felt like it was a huge public library, which is quite amazing.
How did people speak to you as a little girl?
How did people speak to me? My parents or everyone else? That's a good question.
Maybe your parents spoke to you using a different tone than the outside world. It's my understanding that they encouraged you to be an artist, to hop on stage.
Yes, absolutely. When I started playing music, I think I was the only one surprised by it. My parents were simply happy. I felt like they had always seen this in me, perhaps way before I did. They were almost less afraid than I was when I chose this path. It's the exact opposite of a traditional rock and roll storytelling. The kid who turns his back on crying parents.
Yeah, in full rebellion.
My son is an artist. Well, for me, it was quite the opposite. I also remember I didn't hate being a child, but I remember feeling too old regularly. I spoke earlier about the love letter when I was 10 that no one was ever there to receive. That's the kind of stuff that made me feel old.
Like an old lady cells in a little girl's body.
Yeah, this might be a slightly pretentious thing to say, but really, the older I get, I'm now in my 30s, the more I tell myself, well, that's it. I'm finally starting to match my inner self. I certainly feel like I've grown. I sure hope I did, but I remember sliding very often in old lady melancholy during my childhood.
That's interesting.
So the discrepancy between the tone on which people would talk to me and how I felt inside often made me feel very frustrated. I wouldn't understand why anyone would speak to me as if I were a child. You'll understand this later. I was like, well, no, I want to know now.
I read Jane Eyre, I'm ready.
Yeah, exactly. Listen, guys, I read Wuthering Heights, I'm goddamn ready.
I've seen everything.
I've seen everything. The Flesh is Sad. I've read all the books. Yeah, gloomy stuff. But yeah, it's true. I didn't love being young. It was okay, but I didn't love it. The older I get, the better it gets. I always knew that I'd love to get old anyways, so... Actually, I'm really excited about the idea of turning 40. Only 10 years to go.
We'll talk about it again by then.
Maybe I'm acting smart now and I'll end up taking it all back.
Maybe not.
Yeah, maybe not.
And your mother, what kind of woman was she?
C'était quel genre de femme?
My mother, she was a very arty, whimsical woman. She was a French teacher who also teaches Latin and sometimes drama in middle school. She had parts in plays as an amateur actress. She sings. Younger, she did a lot of ballet. She's someone nourished by art who loves feeding it to others too. And she's also a very free-minded person. And if my mother wanted to dance on the street because she likes the song playing in a random car passing by, she'll dance on the street. And I remember feeling embarrassed by her as a teenager. I'd be asking myself, why is she so free? But deep inside, I think I loved it. It just bumped into my own inhibitions. But I've always respected that aspect of her personality. She's someone who tried her best to be powerful and independent at times when it was not an easy thing to do. And I felt like I've constructed my independence using her as a guideline. And I did it with great ease because she carried me through it. Where she was coming from, being a free person wasn't an easy thing to achieve. My mother is a working man's daughter. My father, the son of a farmer. Education really was the key to their emancipation, hence their strong perception of school as a way to reach emancipation. Yeah, obviously now it has become a bit more complex and nuanced because they themselves are teachers, so they experience the reality of today's French educational system. But nonetheless, they left home and school, knowledge and literature were great tools to emancipate themselves. And I had the same feeling. Read a book, it will do you good.
Art and culture were powerful tools for emancipation, almost sacred.
Yeah, but because of that, what was really transmitted to me was a very luminous thing. And I say exactly the same thing. Read this book, it'll change your life.
Yes, you share a lot of readings on your social media, indeed.
Yeah.
I had fun scrolling through your feed, so many references.
Yeah, I try.
We'll get back to it. When you talk about your childhood, I get this feeling you started describing earlier, a feeling of loneliness, of a slightly melancholic discrepancy. I wonder if it could be a prefiguration of this outside-the-box queerness you chose to embrace later on.
Well, I think there's that. As a child, there are instincts you're able to feel but not listen to. I got the words and concepts to express it later on, around 15, 16 years old. I read Judith Butler and I was like, oh, okay, that explains everything.
I get it.
But it's true, I always felt a bit blown apart. Not in the negative sense, but I had trouble bringing myself together. For instance, I remember in middle school, like a super violent period, because it was a period during which you have to be very solid very quickly. You're thrown into a sort of micro-society, so you need to define yourself very quickly. And as a result, you have these super violent power relations taking place. And to me, it was hell. I felt no desire whatsoever to define myself. I was absolutely scattered. I didn't know if I wanted to be a prom queen, a girl, a boy. Well, I wanted to hang out with boys, and at the same time, I had a girl's body in which I didn't feel comfortable, and I was treated as a girl with everything that it carried, which was horrible. I ended up hanging out with the little guys from the drama class. We were like 5, didn't have much friends. We read books and wrote plays for each other, and that's it. That's how we escaped. Yeah, theater, the stage, it all quickly became a loophole. Yeah, and I told myself, great, I will play the cherub in whoever's play. As the cherub was, I would only pick characters who were on hold, unclear.
Kind of neutral. Angel's gender is an absolute mystery.
Yeah, that's it. Or the Shakespearean fool, so... It was a way to bypass that awful obligation to define yourself fast at an early age. I was a tiny feminist who hadn't properly realized it, and that absurd comedy was so tedious. Girls giggling in the corner, guys playing football. I was like, I'm so tired of this. And it made me anxious too. I felt like we were trapping our own selves in performances of our identity. And it never felt natural to me, as I see theater everywhere. I could notice when people picked up their phones and lowered down their tone to sound more masculine. Early on, I identified performance everywhere, and a lot of people just went down with it very naturally, and that's when I started feeling dissociated from all of it, and therefore ended up telling myself I'm going to use drama class to express myself.
No wonder your first reading of Butler felt so groundbreaking, and she also does write about performance.
Yeah, totally, but it's also the beginning of a more serious, more profound and very political reflection on women's place in society, how they are taught very early to act a certain way, to avoid taking up too much space, stuff that still exists, but at least now it's way more discussed. Very simple concepts like manspreading, mansplaining, all the mans something.
These words are very useful. I use them all the time, although they're caricatured because of their obviousness. This occupation of space by speech, by body language, it's obvious. We experience it all the time.
I've always profoundly envied it. I never wanted to become a man, but I've always secretly envied men for all that space I wanted for myself.
Occupy space.
Yeah, and also to grab that freedom I felt I never had. The freedom to arrive naked, not ready, disheveled, tired, anything you want, basically. A woman had to be a sort of construction which immediately appeared very, very tiring to me. And I was tired of it from the start. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to have to do this? I'm exhausted.
On the other hand, this may seem like a paradox, but I read somewhere that you had periods of character embodiment like the ghost Marquise. You are also Marie Antoinette.
Yes, that's true.
It's funny because you rejected social performance as well as gender construction, and at the same time you embraced stage performance disguise at a very young age.
Yeah, that's true.
It was a way to compensate?
A bit Gemini of me, basically.
Clearly, yes.
Yes, I feel like I've always been negotiating with it for some time now. I don't reject the act of performing in itself, but rather this tendency to consider performance innate or natural. So when the time came to become a woman, I became something over the top, almost parodistic, and very theatrical since it was the only thing that sparked my interest. That's why this whole thing with the drag queen scene could happen later on. Drag queens codify femininity, and that's pretty much what I did too. I never became a drag queen, but I clearly did way too much. I thought it was funnier than pretending. So yeah, I had this Russell skirt period, borderline Marie Antoinette, clearly.
It must have been amazing with the waxed complexion and everything.
Yeah.
White makeup on your face.
Well, I thought it was great because I had so much fun. On the other hand, I didn't like myself at that time of my life, so it was
a way to hide.
I took pleasure too, painting my face, but I remember people being annoyed by the very performative aspect of it. I remember taking this drama class once. Actually, this memory was haunted me ever since, and some young girls were slightly cruel to me because they thought I was ridiculous with my whole outfit, whatever. And this was a scene in which one of them had to touch my face. This was dreadful to me because I was completely covered in makeup, and that girl consciously touched my face in a very rough way, then looked at the tips of her fingers with an expression of disgust, like, she wiped her fingers like...
Wow, that kind of stuff leaves a mark on you.
And I felt a bit monstrous, but on the other hand, I couldn't do anything about it. I don't know if this will speak to other self-conscious teenagers who wear a lot of makeup, but a kind of poetic of the physique settles in, avoiding a certain type of lighting, keeping your face from ever touching anything, avoiding sweat, water, having a pretty literary spirit, always just one step away from spiraling. I built a whole world around this way of life. And became some kind of, I learned to control my sweat. Ever since that period, my face doesn't sweat that much.
That's crazy.
Couldn't risk ruining my makeup.
That's insane.
I guess this is the common lot for a lot of teenagers who wear makeup, but in my case, I constructed a whole interior mythology around it. I literally kept a kind of diary, my face's diary. I thought of plastic surgery at some point. I hated my face. And I was obsessed with the fact that we come from our parents, the fact that your appearance is a mix between the two people, and that it's impossible to really choose how your face looks. And at 16, 17, not being able to choose my facial features outraged me.
Determinism felt like a violence to you.
Yeah, a little.
Yes.
So yeah, I feel like it's all linked to my desire to reinvent. But from the moment I chose to become, for instance, Christine, my relationship to my own existence changed. It brought gentleness to my life. And I was miserable, and then I chose to be Christine, and suddenly I looked at myself and said, well, actually, yes. I started seeing what could be beautiful and stuff I used to consider ugly. Anyways, I don't know, maybe the gentleness simply came from being able to choose who I was. When I invented Christine, I was drawing short comics. Yes, I had many career aspirations. I wanted to become a cartoonist for a moment. I still draw today. Christine was a truly enraged feminist character. Not that feminist and enraged are synonyms in any way.
No, not necessarily.
Contrarily to what many journalists believe. I drew a Christine who would bleed so much during her period that her blood would flood the whole city, and it suddenly became very joyful and marked the beginning of some sort of a form of self-love.
Maybe it felt like a liberation also to create a character you could love and embrace, a character who generated love too, that was greeted with open arms right away.
Yeah, that's true. I often use this metaphor of not the superhero, but rather the opposite, like Kick-Ass, a comics character, who's not a superhero, but a simple young man who decides to act as if he was one, which ultimately leads up to him getting all banged up.
He has no superpowers.
No superpowers whatsoever, but it gives him amazing life force, and so he'll carry on no matter what, a dismantled arm, whatever, he'll scream, hoo-yah! And Christine is actually my very own Kick-Ass.
I love this metaphor. It could also apply to feminism. We act as if we have superpowers while it's absolutely not the case.
Yeah, that's it. We're like, ouch, no, not actually, that didn't even hurt. Wait, I have another argument.
Est-ce que vous êtes née femme ou est-ce que vous l'êtes devenue? Were you born a woman or did you rather become one?
Shout out to Simone.
A classic.
Well, I think I almost became one.
Je pense que j'ai failli le devenir.
No, I don't really know. I almost became one because even though I come from a family who took special precautions with that matter, there still were tiny reflexes my parents had, as well as the rest of the world, which almost led me to fully becoming a woman. But at that same point, the machine just seized up. And today I have a woman's body, and sometimes I'm a woman, but I'm not always sure to be a woman. By the way, I'm still not certain I know what it means to be fully a woman.
Et d'ailleurs, je sais toujours pas vraiment ce que c'est qu'être complètement une femme.
Yeah, who knows really?
Well, that's precisely what's great. Each and every one of us are constructing. There lies the whole beauty of the idea of queerness and deconstruction. It's not necessarily a nihilistic end-of-the-world philosophy, which is funny enough when you hear conservatives talk about it, like some kind of abstract conspiracy theory.
Oh my God, they want little boys to wear skirts.
Yeah, that's it. They see the chaos, when in fact it's about giving yourself a wider range of choice and more gentleness. And that's what I brought to my life, gentleness. And it also helped me to disarm systematic, even systemic violence. And even when we talk about sexuality, how we connect to each other, queerness is an amazing source of powerful fluidity and gentleness too. This goes for single human connections as well as queer porn. There's a fantasy, imagination. It's radiant in reality, as opposed to the havoc and deconstruction they like to describe. What an awful shortening conservative saying, little boys wearing skirts. Queerness is questioning what it means to be a little boy. And what struck me once I got engaged in love stories, since I still managed to experience a few with boys, I could see them suddenly loosening up because I myself claimed the right to this reinvention, this freedom. I could literally see their muscles loosening up around me. I mean, maybe it happened with other girls, but I feel like they really could unravel in something a bit more that they don't necessarily explore.
Like a permission to slide towards the femininity, basically.
Yeah, and it's a very beautiful thing. It doesn't make them women, but they suddenly become men of very arousing beauty. Bam, this sort of relinquishment takes place. And I've got to admit that this sliding, loosening up area, oh my, it fascinates me. So it's endless. I'm like, can I take a picture?
Go ahead, slide.
While your masculinity loosens up?
So you engaged yourself in brilliant studies. You got into the École Normale Supérieure of Lyon. Nonetheless, I read somewhere that you were kept from pushing or at least aiming for a stage director career.
Oh, yeah.
Because you were a woman. And it's funny because when I came across this information, it reminded me of the whole controversy surrounding your latest album. People questioned the fact that you did everything yourself, writing, producing. I feel like it's the same story. You're not allowed to be the creator.
Yeah, history repeats itself, right? Yeah, unfortunately. It's true that when the controversies surrounding my second album unfurled, I felt briefly worn out. It didn't last long, perhaps 2 days.
Well, yeah.
I told myself, that again.
There's still a long way to go.
Yeah, a long way to go, yes. Well, it's true that my first painful, significant misogynist experience happened during my drama studies. I immediately identified it as sexism because it was obvious, but I think that in most cases, women are not able to express in that way, which makes it even harder. And you can totally feel that it's pure sexism, but it's presented as completely ambivalent, as it's never the real problem. There lies the great violence. And you try your best to underline the sexist character of your attack. You're like, this is gender-based discrimination, whilst your interlocutors refuse to admit that that's the real problem.
Of course, it's never really named.
Yeah, and that's the most difficult part of it. Being a victim of sexism has happened to me, and it will happen to me again. But watching the sexist nature of the attacks being totally bypassed was harsh. I couldn't hang on to anything during that argument. I was expelled from the Academy of Lyon after long months of quite muddy situations. I mean, 3 students wanted to become directors, 2 boys and me, and I was the only one constantly hitting roadblocks. And it was strange. I couldn't wrap my head around it, nor get a clear explanation on the reason behind it all. And I had no freedom to produce my own play. I was not allowed any time for rehearsal. I was kept from working with other students, very fishy stuff. Anyways, I persist. I was like, listen, it's silly. Some of my classmates wanted a part in my project, so I went on with it. And when word got out that I was still working on the play, I got expelled.
That's unbelievable.
And I was told I had disrespected the school's schedule, that it was a punishment for unsubordination. They never told the truth, which was pretty clear to me. It's disgraceful. And even though I have no trouble talking about it today, at that time it was very violent. You're 20 years old, it's your calling, and you get the message that's been taken away from you because you're a woman, plus the message isn't even clearly expressed.
And maybe perhaps at that time you lacked theoretical knowledge to argue.
Yeah, absolutely.
That conscience, no matter how much you had already read, the conscience that it's something that systematically happens, that obstacles women constantly face.
And when you're dragged in front of a disciplinary board, you have no weapons, no single idea of how to diffuse it at all. You're facing your hierarchical superiors, an educational team. It's basically hell. I remember my mom coming to support me and being talked to in an extremely violent way.
Obviously.
It was a nightmare. And it really knocked me down, this feeling of being completely unarmed. It took me some time to get over it. And music did save me. But when I started in the industry, I wasn't aggressive or anything, but I kept telling myself, never again, never, ever, ever.
J'étais pas agressive, hein, mais je me suis dit plus jamais.
You were prepared to confront that type
never
of
again. I will never let it happen to me ever again.
Plus jamais je laisserai ça.
Hardships make you stronger.
Yeah, it hardens and also brings me some sort of... I'm not an aggressive person or a bossy one. I blush a lot, I'm shy, the whole thing. But I never compromised on that type of thing ever again. And I found myself in situations where, as a young singer-songwriter, I would record in a studio with a sound engineer who plugged 3 cables and then asked me for editing points, meaning writing points. And this is where we are at today. But because what happened to me at drama school was so harsh, I never let go of anything anymore. And I often discuss it with guys, but they can't acknowledge it because you have to experience sexism firsthand to realize the violence of it all. It's the same for street harassment. You've got to experience it to understand it. And they were like, yeah, okay, that was harsh, but you'll get over it. You're a musician now. And I was like, no, you don't even realize the violence of it all. Nobody ever interfered with your business simply because of your gender.
It's invisible as long as you're not the victim of sexism. Patriarchy is really well built.
Yeah, that's it. So yeah, when the whole controversy surrounding my second album bursted, it made me smile a little because the first time I released my album, nobody asked me a single question on its musical production or its writing. It was completely evaporated. And when the subject is being brought up, it's only to accuse me of not writing anything by myself. And the whole logic, samples, polemic made me laugh because guys like Pharrell don't get that kind of comment.
Every artist does it.
I ended up discussing with the guy who did the whole video on the subject, and after he wrote me an apology on Instagram, and he was like, I'm sorry, this took huge proportions, I didn't mean it that way, and I replied, well, maybe next time you should try to take in the context and think about your jokes too. And I think you unconsciously did this to question my authorship, and that's a shame because there are other artists who, you know. Well, anyways, I started discussing it with him, and the dude ended up inviting me to have a coffee with him. I was like, come on.
Stop it.
It's crazy.
That's incredible. Dudes just don't think.
Not always, clearly. Well, neither does some girls, but let's not get into that.
Absolutely.
But it was quite comical, to say the least. I didn't want to make a fuss about it, but still, anyways. I've always been asked if I really wrote my songs.
On me demande encore si j'écris mes chansons, même au-delà de cette sombre affaire. On m'a toujours demandé si j'écrivais.
There's a tendency to perceive women as necessarily performers or muses.
Yes, I recently read Joni Mitchell's biography in the plane, and Joni Mitchell is an amazing writer and poet who spent her whole life watching men to try to take credit for her accomplishments. Even her lovers, her sound engineers. And I think she's the one who said, a single man stands in the room and suddenly my whole authorship becomes questionable. It made me less alone reading this. There are always artists who try to negotiate. Well, I believe women artists are tiring having to work around this constantly. And I'm thinking of artists like Grimes, who is a songwriter, producer, who only works from her home studio and she built it for herself. And it made me realize that lengths we go to simply assert our credibility as producers, as opposed to Kanye West, who just walks into a studio, says this, and that, who is supported by armies of beat makers, but still is considered a genius. And us women, we can produce everything as long as we didn't mix it ourselves. Someone's always going to question our authorship, and it gets really tiring.
Et nous, même si on a tout produit, si on n'a pas mixé, pas sûr qu'on ait tout fait. Donc c'est vrai que c'est un peu crevant, quoi.
Ouais.
So you better love having bags under your eyes.
Ça tombe bien, j'aime bien.
Which is good. I like bags under my eyes, but yeah, it's really tiring.
C'est fatigant.
Really tiring.
It's a mental load.
Yeah, a true mental load. And if you're unable to handle your personal life the right way, you become completely deranged, if you see what I mean.
Completely.
Clairement. Pardon, je tutoie.
Pas de souci. The time has come to talk about the birth of Christine and the Queens. You spoke a lot about it already. I think you are fed up of being asked, but where are the Queens?
Where are they?
I'm going to give a swift account of it so you can avoid having to do it.
I'm seizing the opportunity to eat a chouquette.
Go ahead. So you were depressed by your heartbreak. You left Lyon for London, wandered in the night, ended up in a club where you met a drag queen trio who immediately took you under its wing and convinced you that you belonged on a scene. This story you have told it so many times during interviews that some journalists went looking for the queens in London to interview them.
Yeah, inevitably, yes.
I personally picture this story as a parable. I feel like your encounter with the queens is in fact your encounter with the queer.
Yeah, that's it somehow. It's even a very novelistic way to recount that moment when I realized queerness was going to save me, that I was going to use those self-emancipating aesthetics, extremely stylized self-reinvention tools, not by becoming a drag queen myself, but by channeling its idea.
D'émancipation de soi, de réinvention de soi, qui sont très stylisées et qui sont très évidentes.
Some overwhelmingly beautiful philosophies are brought to the scene by many different queer movements, from voguing to drag performances. And there's an idea of empowerment behind it all, like this marvelous sentence from the Vogue scene, "You own everything again." Now that's something I could use as a young girl.
Il y a cette idée d'empowerment, comme on dit en anglais, et il y a cette très belle phrase du...
My journey was obviously a lot different than anything those performers had experienced, but their philosophy saved me, the young girl I was. We weren't the victims of the exact discriminations, but we all used the stage to emancipate ourselves.
Que tous ces performeurs-là, mais c'est quelque chose qui, moi, a pu me sauver, moi, en tant que jeune fille. Parce que j'étais victime...
So yeah, it's a very immediate way to tell the story, a good way to illustrate it too. I myself live in a very novel-like period of my life, and that's what I liked about it too, how novel-like it all was. I think I had been waiting for this encounter to solidify what I wanted to do. It was so beautiful, I told myself, I want this to be my birth certificate.
Parce que c'était tellement beau que je me suis dit ça va être, j'ai envie que ce soit mon acte de naissance, quoi.
I think it gave me some sort of furious energy, to which they responded a bit like, calm down, you know, chill, everything is going to be fine. And I was like, no, but we should start a band. And you would play with me. And they were like, okay, but have you ever written a song? And I was like, no. But they were like, okay, well, you're going to write a song and then you'll be back to us once you do. Yeah, I definitely really wanted to be the start of something. I felt enlightened and I didn't let go of that feeling.
Like a true novel's heroine.
Yeah, I told myself, now is the time. That's it. All this literature I stuffed my younger self with was stirred up. I thought to myself, isn't this the perfect start to a novel?
Yes, you truly wrote yourself. It is such a strength. I think that the true challenge lies in your ability to write your own self, whether you're a famous artist or not.
Yeah, that's true. It's very beautiful.
Isn't it?
Very beautiful.
Thank you.
I'm going to write it down.
So the figure of the drag queen somehow carries this thing you were talking about at the beginning of this interview. If you wish to caricature without any regards to political correctness, drag queens are a man sliding towards femininity. I get the feeling you have been offloading your feminine attributes for the last few years. You never wear skirts.
And yet.
Your hair gradually shortened. Even your name lost the syllable that feminized it. Christine became Chris. I was wondering if making those exterior signs of femininity disappear healed you or protected you from something.
Well, it's an interesting discussion because it's true that I've been getting rid of those almost traditional signs of femininity, but it's because it's not a femininity that was right for me. And I also think there are many femininities to construct and reinvent, and some of them speak to me more than others. I'm becoming more and more comfortable with who I am as opposed to my 20s I spent in Russells. I mean, Russells are pretty, but they didn't suit me that well. I'm more comfortable with the idea of a more ambivalent femininity, but not that much. What I want to say is that I don't consider myself very androgynous, even if the short hair offer me that possibility. I feel like the hairdo allows me to become even more of a woman, even femme, as we say. I wear dresses more and more frequently because the short hair allows me to channel a more sexual, aggressive 90s femininity that I like a lot.
Parce qu'en fait, avec les cheveux courts, une espèce de féminité un peu sexuelle 90s, agressive, que j'aime beaucoup.
Yeah, a tad Demi Moore. I've just seen it.
Complètement.
Yeah, totally. And actually, while in 2014 I was wearing long hair and sometimes lipstick or large earrings, I hid my body behind wide, fully button costumes a lot more.
Yes, those huge Jacquemus costumes you used to wear at the very beginning, they were incredible.
Yeah, they were very beautiful. And it's funny how I personally feel so much more womanly now, yet people consider I recently masculinized myself a lot. I think it's because I come back with a poster on which I appeared with a pointed finger, short hair, named myself Chris. People associate short hair with masculinity, and that's very interesting to me because there are so many short hair women whose femininity I love. We're all products of the 80s, and the 80s are basically short hair and huge triangle earrings. It is not very conceptual to me, but I sure did play with the masculine side it could bring me. Anyways, what I want to say is that I got rid of the feminine features that bothered me in order to drift towards the femininity I'm more comfortable with. And that led to countless weird conversations regarding the second album. And I didn't think it was very innovative of me. Performers like Annie Lennox or even Mylène Farmer in the 80s have done this way before me.
Of course.
Yeah, there were Desireless too, women who were channeling a femininity that didn't require long hair and lip gloss.
Grace Jones, that's true.
Of course. So women who add touches of masculinity only to make their femininity more explosive and erotic speaks to me a lot. But I never allow myself to explore that before. And that exploration really is what interests me, and that's where I am today. Maybe 10 years I'll be somewhere else, pretty much anything is possible, but funnily enough, I had the impression I was clarifying my femininity rather than rejecting it outright.
It's true, this conversation was staggering. After all the teasing around the album's release, this poster appeared and people were like,
yeah, of course.
Oh my god, she's a transgender, she became a man, whatever.
Yeah, that's it.
All those rumors going around. It's just a haircut, guys.
Plus, you can see one of my breasts on the poster. So if I was planning on switching over to a trans aesthetic, and it would have been an awful appropriation if I had done that without transitioning myself. I would have bound my breast, for instance. But it wasn't the case at all. So, yeah, the short hair, especially in France, it was insane. Yeah, I still have to talk about it. Like, wow. Even my family. It's crazy how it was such a strong symbol to them. The older members were like, you're going to a live TV interview with this haircut? What are we going to say to our friends? And I was like, what do you mean? What are you going to say to your friends?
That's funny.
There's nothing to explain. It's just I cut my bloody hair. But I learned a bittersweet lesson with all this. It was kind of okay for me to talk about queerness as long as I had the long hair and the earrings. But on the other hand, it's because somehow I toned down the message.
This speaks to me a lot.
Yeah, it was a bit like, yeah, she's such a cutie pie, queerness, what? And once I cut my hair, all of a sudden it became visually more ambiguous, and bam, everything was heard properly. People seemed surprised, like they were just discovering the message. And that was the point of the second album. The first one was magnificently massive, and how it was welcomed, its success, and honestly it was an anomaly because the album wasn't seized for French radio at all. I mean, the sound wasn't French. Anyways, it was a crazy destiny. For the second album, I wanted to be more specific, to say, okay, are you sure we've met? Just to be sure, here I am. So it was a slightly defiant gesture, but a very joyful one. I enjoyed writing this album a lot, and it was the complete opposite of something aggressive. It was very hedonistic. I thought of Prince a lot, of something slightly sexually aggressive, but that's where orgasmic joy comes from, and had to go through self-assertion.
I love this idea. Are you sure you've heard what I said?
Well,
it speaks to me a lot. You know, as a white, blonde woman, I'm allowed to carry on the most radical speech, whereas my black, short-haired friends saying the exact same thing.
Yeah, that's interesting.
She'll be put in her place.
Yeah, that's it. Real quick, yeah.
That's very interesting.
You're basically a Trojan horse.
Yeah, totally. Even if this expression is a bit... I mean, I really want to blow up everything. Anyways, I get it. You've talked about the first album, dazzling success. It was mind-blowing. Your first EP, titled Miséricorde, gets released in 2011, and you instantly get awards, the Printemps de Bourges, the Francopholies. You remember what it was like to be this 23-year-old young woman? What was her expectations for the future?
Well, we were talking about novels earlier, and it's true that this story almost sounds like a fairy tale. I may be overdoing it by saying that, but is not that far from reality. It was very beautiful because I had written songs right after my trip to London, and my friends from drama suggested that I upload them on internet. There was still MySpace at the time.
Ah, MySpace.
What's up, young people? I'm old. And I got spotted to play opening acts quite fast indeed. I quickly started playing on stages, being surrounded by people from the industry. It all went really fast, but at the same time, I didn't skyrocket in like 1 year. It took me 3 years to release my first album. Plus, Chaleur, humaine didn't make that much noise when it got out. I toured a lot, and suddenly, bang, it was a long rise. Very, very absorbing too. And funny thing, I was told off at first on stuff that ended up becoming my signature.
Like what, for instance?
Well, my dancing, for example.
Really?
I remember channeling a way freakier aesthetic when I opened shows in 2012. I would arrive on stage with freaky costumes, deer horns, the whole thing. I didn't play any instruments. I was completely into dancing, which in France was considered weird. And I remember professionals from the industry, even technicians, would allow themselves to come up to me and say, "Why do you dance like that? Do you really think people want to see you dance?" And I just got out from a sexist situation, so it seemed derisory in comparison, but...
We want to hear you, but not look at you, basically.
Yeah, and perhaps my dancing didn't fit into the male gaze. I wasn't there to arouse them. I was there to liberate myself. My movements were not necessarily sexy, not necessarily cute, you know. Some guys were like slightly annoyed by that fact. They were like, who does she think she is? First, she's weird. Second, she enjoys being weird. And then on top of it all, she doesn't give a shit. It's funny to think it ended up completely switching up and that dance became something that defines me entirely. At least for a lot of people it does. And for me too, actually. It would be pretentious to say I'd educated people, but it's true that I'm a concept in the sense that I spend a lot of time explaining and then winning over. Before it could become beautiful and friendly, I feel like my artistic career has been punctuated by moments where I just have to wait for people to understand.
Yeah, there is some of that.
And that's fine, but that's what truly happened at the beginning of my project. Even if it's true, it got really impressive with Chaleur, humaine.
Kind of crazy.
It was incredibly beautiful. Yeah, and intense too, and it was a first album, and there's a lot of pressure. You don't anticipate at first, and you get invested with this thing that's way more impressive than whatever you imagine. So I remember my Zenith tour. It was very joyful, and at that same time, I had a lot of oh my god moments. You don't really understand what's happening, basically. And that's why the second album was good, because as soon as I get into that space of creation and writing, I don't know, this kind of sacred thing happens. I stop interiorizing it all at once. I drop everything that's happening before or that will happen after to immerse myself in a truth of what I wish to work on. And this is going to sound effective, but I felt no pressure whatsoever. On the contrary, I was excited for the second chapter. We're always coming back to the idea of a novel. Well, to me, albums are like novel chapters. I'm like the novelist cracking her fingers. I'm like, all right. And it was true what you said about writing ourselves, that writing our own self-craziness never stops and pushes us to announce our next mutation. And I set myself challenges too. Chris was a challenge. I was like, okay, now you have to explore your eroticism in a less modest, more assertive way, and that's it. And it was life-challenging, so it's a bit addictive. You end up incapable of living without it.
There was also a political message delivered through Chaleur, humaine. I mean, you're one of the very few women French artists that came out as gay. It's no secret that it's complicated to voice such issues in France where homophobia is violent. I'm thinking of this whole movement against gay marriage, which started at the same period, by the way.
Yeah, it was exactly the same period.
So hats off for doing it at that time.
Thank you. That's nice.
Do you still want to carry this political message?
Yeah, well, to be true, I don't know if it really carries it, but I want to talk about it. I want visibility, I want to formulate, but that's what's ambivalent about it. And the proof that we still haven't reached the point where it can lead to a relaxed conversation. If I start talking about my pansexuality, well, for starters, half of French journalists have asked me if I invented the word.
Okay.
So it's a bit worrying. I was like, no, don't worry, that has been theorized before me. I talk about it because of profound conviction, by necessity, because I can't do it another way. Because it has constructed me too, and finally because I want to be able to use alternatively masculine and feminine pronouns in my writing without having to explain why. I want to be myself fully because this was born from the desire to stop apologizing. And starting from there, no more detours. But what's very insidious and paradoxical is the fact that because I was one of the rare French artists to talk about it without fear, even with joy, and the more I theorized it, the more I fed it. And indeed, it ended up imprisoning me. And it became the only topic of discussion. And I was like, I'm still a composer, songwriter, player who just released an album that's right on the table in front of you. Anyways, I have discovered that talking about music during interviews organized for a promotional tour is very rare. I checked other people's interviews just to be sure. And very few musicians actually get questions on their music. So it's fine, but yeah, that's all they wanted me to talk about. It became almost obsessional. Plus, it's so obvious that some journalists have stuff to deal with on that subject.
Yeah, they want to dig in a very unhealthy way.
Yeah, and you want to remind them, it's not a sexual perversion, right? You can loosen up. It's a shame you haven't got to the point where you can deconstruct it all, but I'm not going to solve all your problems for you. And I've been asked to explain what queerness was. I mean, it's 2019, goddammit. As a journalist, you should consider reading 2 or 3 books.
Or maybe you can Google it.
Or Google, if you want to make it quick, yeah. So I was constantly brought back to the subject and being asked right after, aren't you fed up about being the poster girl? And I was like, damn, I'm not even a part of the discussion anymore. It's happening without me, and it's quite insidious. But I've always taken upon myself to talk about it because the simple fact of hearing girls talk about it is something I miss growing up. And I think I've always been pansexual, but it took some time before I could meet the word and recognize myself in it because no one around me would talk about it. And when it happened, it was often oversimplified. I would say I was pansexual, and then they were like, oh, okay, you're gay, basically. And I was like, no, I've had stories with girls, but I can clearly consider myself pansexual based on most recent experiences. So yeah, it feels essential to me, but it's a shame it's still so political to do so.
Exactly. By the way, I was wondering to what extent going to the United States and to Britain for the promotion of your album and also releasing an album in English as well as in the French version, was it like a way to escape the French narrow-mindedness on those questions?
Well, yes and no. The double album responded to something very pragmatic. I'd gotten to the point where I had a double career. I was French and wanted to continue writing in French because I love it so much. Plus, I was working on G-funk samples, very rhythmic stuff, and I told myself, okay, French is going to sound so scrumptious on this, like a little Twix. Am I allowed to say Twix? We don't know. We'll be there.
Yes, of course you can say whatever you want on a podcast. Brands, whatever. It's super cool.
Oh, great. So I had released an English version of Chaleur humaine in England. It had a very strong existence there as well as in the US. So it would have been useless to restrict myself to a French album. It was a very pragmatic thing to do, really. So obviously it led to discussions, and it was funny because it led me to live in a double reality too, which did not help my explosions, my broken mirrors.
Worse than double, again and again.
That's it. So it's true that especially on this album, Chris, discussions grew tense in France. They had a tendency to brutally escalate, no matter how relaxed I was during interviews. And the journalists facing me were in a whole different mood. But then I would take the Eurostar and arrive all tightened up in England thinking, okay, what's going to happen here? What are they going to say? And then in England, it wasn't a problem at all. The characters' evolution, queerness didn't require an explanation. Queerness was part of a reflection around hybridity and sound. And England was right where I was.
Yeah, there was no need for this whole educational process.
Yeah, that's it. And it was already part of a reflection, which nourished the questions I was being asked as well. I was like,
You've brought up the theme of sexuality several times during this interview already. You've talked about eroticism, desire, and there's this song I love called Follarse, in which you claim an intense sexual desire. It's reflected on your video clips as well, like the first one you released, it channels this bondage, SM fantasy. It got me wondering if claiming a right to sexual pleasure could not be the ultimate feminist taboo to transgress. You know, the right to fantasize as a woman. We still have so much to conquer on that matter.
Yeah, it's exactly that. And every time I produce an album, I feel like there's constant element of fear. I know it's going to be complicated, but I'm going to transgress something and it's not going to be easy to do so. But that's also why I want to do it so bad. And with the second album, I remember being in a full awareness of this fact. And I told myself I want to make a very horny woman's album because I realized how disturbing it still was, whether in my personal life or any other woman's life. I have been told in my own sexual life, oh, so you like that, huh? Which I thought was very interesting. I was like, what do you mean I'm like that? Did you expect me to crawl under the sheets and apologize for desiring you? So it's very interesting. And I also felt it was unsettling many people, sometimes women who interviewed me. They would sit down facing me asking, you really think we want that? Why are you being so aggressive? Bringing up aggressiveness is interesting enough. I was like, it's not aggressive, it's just desire. I work with a desiring woman's energy is all, which means a woman who's not necessarily waiting to be desired. And that's something the ghost of the whore is still haunting us.
Une énergie de femme qui désire, c'est-à-dire qui ne va pas forcément attendre d'être désirée. Et ça reste encore un truc. Le fantôme de la salope qui flotte.
Of course, the worst insult.
Yeah, the worst. And I recently came across a very beautiful video on the internet in which a young woman who lives in the United States starts by saying, I am a slut, and ends up delivering a feminist manifesto that says, I'm a slut, but you're a slut, everyone's a slut, the mic's a slut. And I thought it was very beautiful because it turned inside out this very patriarchal stigma of women having to wait to be desired, women whose sexual energy always depends on another energy, most of the time masculine. It's so narrow-minded. Even in my younger years, I remember being struck by discussions with young girls, friends of mine who were 15 years old and had never masturbated. I mean, it's not a big deal, but it's still, when the trope of masculine teenagers is Kleenex and constant masturbation, it's no surprise that girls who haven't touched themselves in their youth don't know how to come. And the matter is evolving, but slut-shaming remains a very powerful stigma.
Yeah, when you see all those Instagram accounts that are trying to raise awareness around subjects like the clitoris or women's pleasure, they end up being censored. It's treated like pornographic content when it's really just education.
Yeah, totally.
Mais aussi la grosse hypocrisie. Nous, on en a marre des femmes.
Also, enough with this hypocrisy that's even worse than anything else. Women are constantly over-sexualized, yet you're not allowed to be sluts. It's paradoxical.
On peut pas être des salopes. Donc c'est quand même paradoxal. Parce qu'on est dans des esthétiques, même on parle d'Instagram, mais tous les...
I remember coming across young guys in the subway looking at accounts of women with great butts and being like, what a slut. And I would say, you're sexually attracted to this woman and you just wish she would make love to you. So why on earth are you saying, what a slut? I mean, what a slut? Why? Are you angry with her for cultivating this sexually image she constantly gets locked up in? It's such a confusing relationship to women. The world wants them to be super exciting, but God forbid they become sluts. It's like a rather sterile dead end.
C'est une impasse pas très féconde, quoi.
So it's true that with that album, I wanted to work on an active, hot, guided sexuality. Not necessarily threatening, but yeah, that's it.
Chaude, dirigée, mais qui n'était pas forcément menaçante, mais qui effectivement était, voilà,
follarse. It's like, okay, I'm hungry, I want to be fucked, and I want to fuck. So what?
Qu'est-ce qui se passe? Alors que souvent, un homme qui est séducteur.
While seductive, sometimes even predatory men are perceived as sexy, women remain sluts.
Je trouvais ça très intéressant de travailler ça. Et je lisais à ce moment-là des auteurs.
And I thought it was interesting to work on this. At the same time, I was reading authors like Maggie Nelson.
Yes, The Argonauts. Amazing book.
Yeah, amazing. And those writers are great intellectuals who also write stuff like, I too have the right to be a whore. They speak of sexuality, crudely, of their need for sex, their desire to be penetrated, to know pleasure, yet all the while remain in great, beautiful, intellectual reflections. And that's it. I was like, thanks. Everything coincides. I don't want to choose at all. And that question was particularly touching during French interviews. And they were like, why are you so angry? Why are you so aggressive? You know, trying hard to portray my desire as hysterical. And I was like, my desire isn't hysterical. My desire is simple.
As if it was some madness or an anomaly.
Exactly. And there was also this, so you went off the rails. What's happening? Or the association with frustration, when it's absolutely not the case. So, yeah, it was very interesting. It's true, it's risky, but I like it. And I love pushing on frustrating society's points of tension. I love the stretch between releasing a major radio hit, something that everyone can sing along to, and working on projects with the desire to unlock stuff that are smothering me.
Un hit, quoi, qui soit un truc que tout le monde puisse chanter. Et en même temps, je fais ce projet aussi parce que j'en ai besoin, moi, pour essayer de déverrouiller des choses qui m'étouffent un peu, quoi. Donc, ouais.
This stretch you're talking about really is a true achievement.
Well, thank you. That's nice.
Vous avez fait un petit lapsus sur la fécondité, c'est intéressant parce que
It's time for La Poudre ritual questions. How do you get along with your uterus?
We converse quite a lot. Our relationship is getting better and better, but it has been a long process. And I love my female body, but it made me suffer too. However, I've got to admit, this is now coming to me spontaneously because we're talking about the uterus, but the question of fertility, maternity, and everything is something that doesn't preoccupy me or appeal to me either.
J'en parle spontanément parce qu'on parle d'utérus, mais la question
and the more
de la maternité,
I come close to this canonical age where the quote-unquote biological clock starts ticking, the more I get questioned on the fact that I don't necessarily want to become a mother. I have to justify myself more and more, and inevitably it leads me to question myself on my relationship with my own uterus. The doubts are interiorized.
Parce que tu intériorises les doutes, quoi.
And being repeatedly asked, you'll eventually end up wanting kids, right? I'm like, well, no, I don't want to. And it starts up an interior dialogue between my female body and my uterus that's rather gentle, but still, it takes some work to discard social standards surrounding the questions. And I wish I could have a bias-free conversation with my uterus, but it's not completely possible for me just yet. It's an ongoing work.
Yes, without the outside world joining in.
Yeah, that's it. That's a problem. Women's bodies equals everyone getting involved, even from the inside.
That's good, at least that way. Do you have access to a room of your own?
Well, it's funny, there's almost no link whatsoever with the question, but I'm thinking of this record cover I just saw. It's from an artist called Waste Blood that I adore. And the cover pictures herself in her entirely submerged teenage bedroom. And it's beautiful, and so beautiful. I highly recommend listening to it. Anyway, I had a very lonely adolescence, secluded, but not in a negative sense of the term. So I hanged out in my room a lot, and I often present Chaleur, humaine like a bedroom album. It took form in my bedroom solitude, and I often say Chris is me walking out of that bedroom. There it is. It's silly, but...
No, it's a very interesting metaphor.
So I've mythologized this idea of this teenage room you never really leave, where you keep going back. Sometimes it's like I'm in a movie and a feeling, a look. I get just suddenly propelled back to this teenage room. And my youth is linked to this idea of being warm in silence, somewhere in that room. So I've always protected it, and I often go back to it. It's always slightly painful and strangely comforting. Ever since I started being exposed, I refused to give up everything.
Bizarrement réconfortant. Mais en même temps, du coup,
I think it's very important to be able to retreat, to withhold.
J'ai jamais voulu tout donner. Je trouve aussi que c'est très important de
to allow yourself not to respond to everything, to allow yourself to hide. And I like the idea of living somewhere nobody ever sees. I would have trouble letting the room get flooded by water, basically. I wouldn't like it too much. So yeah, to answer your question, I do manage to find refuge in that room of my own, often. And otherwise, I become a bit wacky. Solitude to me is quite natural and indispensable. When I started going on tour, I had to negotiate with the idea I wouldn't get my own room very often. So at first I was like, oh, phew. Don't get me wrong, I really loved being with my team and everything, but I remained an ex-major loner, so I felt better now. I feel better now because I managed to get my room internally, you know. I just closed the door.
Yes.
But at first it was I've lived through a huge displacement in my life in the sense that my opportunities have expanded drastically. And no matter how okay it feels to be outside now, I used to be afraid of everything. I was afraid to board on a plane. I was afraid to take the bus. I was afraid to talk to people. I was afraid to pick up the phone. And, you know, as we said, I've come a long way.
Wow, that's fantastic. What does la poudre, the powder, mean to you?
Well, two things. The first one comes from my Marie Antoinette period. I think of blush, plainly. The stuff that forms a little cloud every time you move your head around, because I used to wear too much. And also, it makes me think of explosive powder. I bet that happens a lot. So it can either be very soft or dangerous, which is pretty cool. You remain in the ambivalence. I swear I did not do it on purpose. I'm going to turn into Two-Faced with my flipping coin, you know. I love that double aspect of things so much.
That's exactly the idea. Thank you so much, Héloïse.
Merci.
Thank you to Chris for speaking up in La Poudre. Nouvelles Écoutes is the executive producer of La Poudre, a podcast produced by Aurore Meyer-Mailleux, prepared and recorded by Gaia Marty, and mixed by Audrey Gineste. The English dubbing is made by Charles de Cilia and mixed by Clotilde Fauchil. Thank you to Elise Anderson-Scotto for our English voice.